Hello, everyone, and welcome to our conversation on grief and loss with Midwest Areas and Mental Health Ireland today. We have some lovely panelists who are joining us today. So I'll just ask our panelists, Tricia, Fiona, and Jennifer, to turn on their video there and unmute themselves. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Claire. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Hello, Tricia.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm just going to just do a little bit of housekeeping for us and for our attendees as well, and then we can get straight into our conversation. So just so everybody know, it's going to be a 1 hour, going to be panel discussion, and we'll have some presentations and chat from our panelists as well. At the end, we'll have an opportunity for some questions and answers. And if anybody would like to ask a question, you can do it through the chat function, where you can ask an anonymous question. There isn't a function to actually chat with the panelists, to have a conversation through chat or with anyone else attending the webinar, but you can post an anonymous question there, which only I'll see and I can put to the panelists then. If we do get a lot of questions, just to say we may not have time to answer everything, but we will be sending out resources. Midwest Areas will send out a pack to everybody who has signed up for the webinar with information about our panelists who have attended today, the organisations, and many other support organisations as well. And you can always contact me in my role as well. And I'll be sharing my contact information after the fact as well, if you need some information that I can signpost you to, or I can share some information with you as well. So the webinar is being recorded as well. So anyone who, if you want to share it with anybody else, you can send them to Midwest Areas YouTube channel. And it's also available via Anchor FM, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts as well. So an opportunity to watch it again after the fact if you like, or to share it with other people as well. So thank you very much. Just want to introduce our panelists, or if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves. Jennifer, maybe I'll start with yourself. Do you want to introduce yourself there?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Moran-Stritch, and I'm a lecturer at the Technological University of the Shannon, probably formerly known as Limerick Institute of Technology in Moylish in Limerick.
Thank you, Jennifer, and you're very welcome, and thanks for coming along today. Fiona, can I ask you to introduce yourself next, if that's okay?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Fiona Toomey, and I'm the CEO of the suicide bereavement charity called HUG.
Lovely. You're very welcome as well. And Tricia, last but not least, could I ask you to introduce yourself as well?
My name is Tricia Healy, and I'm a biodynamic and integrative psychotherapist and artist who works with palliative patients, end-of-life patients, and in cancer support.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So if everyone can see, we some amazing people on our panel today. So, and each of them are going to just speak to us for a few moments, just to get into a bit more about what they do in their organizations, what their organizations do as well. So Jennifer, maybe I can ask you if you want to start maybe on your presentation.
Sure, I will. Yep. Let's hope the technology behaves for me. That's always the the question. Now you might tell me if you can see that. You're okay? Okay, great. Well, hi, everyone. And I really want to thank Claire and Mental Health Ireland and Midwest Areas for inviting me along to this this afternoon. It's going to sound funny, but talking about loss and grief, which are difficult subjects, are some of my favorite things to do, because I've always been fascinated about how human beings sort of view grief, experience grief, how loss, is dotted and punctuated across our lives, and how we very often transcend the losses and the deaths that occur in our lives, and how we kind of understand our own mortality and our own death. So that's my name. That's the faculty that I teach in, Applied Sciences and Technology. I teach mostly in the social care and psychology programs. But I also have a few kind of outside interests in that. Beyond my teaching, I'd be very interested in research, and you wouldn't be surprised to hear that my research centers around experiences of loss and grief for people. And so I am the principal investigator of a research group at TUS, which is called the Loss and Grief Research Group. And we're part of an overall research institute. You can see our logo over there, the Social Sciences Connections Research Institute. It's been at TUS for, just over a decade now. And myself and a series of postgraduate students will do some investigations into all different kinds of loss. A lot of things that are related and connected to death and dying, but also other kind of non-death experiences of loss across the lifespan. We also do work with a variety of organizations, both here in Ireland, and we have some European partners as well, that we work together to explore what really works for people when they're bereaved or when they're grieving something. And then also kind of looks at some wider social issues, like what are some options or some choices that people might make around what happens to them after they die, like what is there beyond burial, what is there beyond cremation, how affordable are those things, what's the meaning of sort of visiting graves and memorializing people. So you know, my research allows me to have lots of different conversations with people about lots of different things connected to loss and grief. And I suppose one of the other things that I do is that I'm a host and sometimes a co-host for an activity called a Death Cafe. And in particular, I work with the Death Cafe that happens in Limerick. We've been having death cafes since 2015. And they are opportunities that happen to allow people to come together and talk about all aspects of death, dying, bereavement, the afterlife, and their feelings and experiences around those things. And I suppose I see that as part of my work to help maybe normalize the idea of the fact that we all will die, and to help people be a little bit more aware of how grief affects us. These events are free. They're open to anyone who is over the age of 18. And so there, you know, anybody can attend these. Ours tonight is sold out, I have to say, which is a happy problem. But if you're interested in kind of following the work or maybe attending a Death Cafe in the future, you can find us on Facebook at Death Cafe Limerick. I have to say there's a lot of really wonderful things that happen at death cafes, but probably the most wonderful thing that happens, and it has to happen because it is a rule that was set up by the gentleman who started these, is that there has to be cake at the death cafe, which we love. And the reason that he said, listen, there needs to be cake or any kind of celebratory food, you know, whatever your culture says is a way that you celebrate, right? Is because part of what you're doing at a death cafe is really celebrating your one finite mortal life on this planet, at least at this point, this is your one existence, right? So by exploring our ideas around death and mortality, we sort of maybe start to appreciate life a little bit more in that way too. Death Cafe Limerick is sort of a loose organization, and along with the research group that I run at TUS, I'm happy to say we are part of the Limerick Bereavement Network. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in the next slide, but I'm really delighted that this network has started. It's sort of a collective of organizations that support people around loss, death, and bereavement. And we started in 2022, but I'll tell you about that on the next slide. I sometimes get embarrassed when I say this, but one of my roles or one of my titles is that I am a certified thanatologist. And a lot of times when I say that to people, they say, what is that? I have never heard of that before in my life. What is that thing, a thanatologist? And what it means is that I have a deep, usually academic, you know, which fits with me being a lecturer, but that I have a deep interest in all aspects of death, dying, and grief, and how we understand them in our lives. So like I said, my interests run from everything from, you know, what use are funerals to people, to what are different burial traditions in different cultures, to you know, what people's beliefs are about the afterlife, to you know, how can we support children who are grieving, like anything that has to do with any aspect of death, dying, or grief is something that I'm interested in. And being a thanatologist really helps me inform and shape my teaching work. So I would do a bit of teaching both with our social care students at TUS and also with our psychology students to get them to think about these topics as well and get them to sort of identify how they feel about these things, which I think is pretty useful because they are going to be going out and working with people who might be in really vulnerable places in their life or who they themselves might be affected by loss and grief. So, once you sort of get this sense of where you are and where you stand on those things, what you need some help with, or maybe what you're curious about, you're usually better prepared to go out and help other people who might be in a really fragile state around those things. So that's how kind of my research interests sort of help me shape the teaching that I do. I should also say another place that I teach is up in Dublin with the Irish Hospice Foundation on their Masters in Loss and Bereavement. And that is run through the Irish Hospice Foundation with the support of the Royal College of Surgeons. And I'm really delighted to say I've been teaching with them, I think about 6 years now, really around things like the sociology of death and how death is looked at from a public view and sometimes from a policy view, but also from a cultural view. So that's some other teaching that I do around loss and grief. That's my email address. If anyone who's here or who watches this is curious about what we do at TUS around loss and grief, or what I do in my teaching, or you have any questions about Death Cafe Limerick, you could always email me there. We are on Facebook at Death Cafe Limerick. And if you're a Twitter, or I suppose I should say X user, I'm at @StrichJ, and I tweet about a lot of things, but I do tend to tweet about aspects of loss and grief and bereavement and sort of, what's happening currently in those spheres. I suppose there's one other thing that I really want to give you some detail on, and it's a really happy development, I think, for people in the greater Limerick area. And I know, in particular, my colleague who's here on the webinar with us, Fiona Toomey, has also been part of this, and she was really in on the ground floor when we were getting it started. But that is the Limerick Bereavement Network. And you can see here, there's a variety of logos for different organizations, a lot of which you may be familiar with in the Limerick area. And they're organizations that have come together since late 2022, so just about a year and a half now. We came together really with the support of the Irish Hospice Foundation and their not only their sort of financial support with a little bit of seed funding around that, but also their guidance and their wisdom around coming together and creating a network of organizations and charities that support people around grief. And I suppose for me, especially because I'm involved in education, the big thing that I want to do, whether it's through Death Cafe Limerick or through, being part of this webinar today, or through my teaching or my research, being part of the Bereavement Network, is to give opportunities to elevate or increase people's grief literacy. So we talk about a lot about literacy and having the capacity to be able to read, or numeracy, to be able to use numbers. Well, I'd like to give people the opportunity to feel like that they're capable, if they encounter loss and grief in their own lives, but equally that they're capable in supporting in an appropriate way and recognizing how grief might be affecting other people in their lives. So I'm thrilled to say we have these organizations that work together. So you can see the loss and grief logo, that's for the research group that I do. And then you can see Death Cafe Limerick. We also have the Children's Grief Center, Limerick Mental Health Association, Laura Lynn Children's Hospice, which has recently started to provide services to people here in the Midwest, which is wonderful. The North Star Family Support Project, which supports people whose families have been affected by addiction. A Little Lifetime Foundation, which supports bereaved parents. That's a national organization. Jacinta Smile, which really looks at what can be done to help siblings who have experienced the death of a brother or sister. And that's very often a grief that's ignored for people. So that's a lovely organization located in the Midlands, but they're interested in sort of beginning to provide services down here. Pieta House, which a lot of people are familiar with in terms of suicide and support around suicidality. UL Hospitals, which has an end-of-life care coordinator. I'm sure people will be very familiar with Milford Hospice that you can see there, and they have their facility where, you know, people go at the end of life for care. But they also have community supports to help people who are in palliative care. And I know Tricia is going to talk a little bit about her work in that area. Anam Cara, which also is a support for parents who have experienced the death of a child. And then Hug, which I won't say too much about because we're lucky enough to have Fiona here today. So she's really going to give you the background on what Hug does, and in particular, the support groups that they offer here in the Limerick area. And I think I got everybody. My screen is blocking one of my, did I get all my logos? Because yeah, they're in the corner. Yeah. So we've come together. We are trying to hold at least 3 events per year for the public in the greater Limerick area to attend. And they're all different kinds of events that we have had so far. We actually have one tonight, which is a death cafe. It's, as I said before, it's sold out, but it is supported by the Limerick Bereavement Network. We've had a couple of online events in which we've had discussion panels for people, representatives of religious organizations and different faiths in Ireland, to talk about sort of the, you know, afterlife beliefs and the role of religion in supporting people when they're grieving. And we're planning another quite a large event called a Living with Loss event. You can look for it in kind of probably September or maybe early October this year. It will be held at a local hotel in Limerick, and it will be a bringing together of all these different organizations to talk about the supports that they can offer people. It's another little way of kind of raising people's grief literacy. And we'll have some really good expert guest speakers. And it's just an evening for people to kind of get the support that they need, or find out where they can go to get the support that they need. So that is me. I'm going to stop sharing for now. And then if anybody has questions or anything later, we can talk about them, or
Absolutely.
we'll have my contact details there. So
yeah,
thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. No, it's great to hear that there are so many organizations that are there offering support to people, which is absolutely amazing, and that more and more work is happening in Limerick as well. And again, I just let people know we will be sharing resources after the webinar. So if they don't have a pen and paper or anything like that, whatever email you registered with, this information will be sent to you as well. So you can, you know, you can contact the organizations if you feel that they can be of particular support to you as well. So I'm going to ask now, so thank you for that, Jennifer. Very informative. Thank you so much. Fiona, if you're okay now, we'd love to hear a bit more about Hug.
Great. Thank you so much, Claire. So in the lapse of the technological gods, I'm going to share my screen. Just bear with me and I'll put that into, there we go. So like I said at the beginning of the webinar, I'm the CEO of the National Suicide Bereavement charity called Hug. And I just want to take you through just a little sort of whistle-stop tour of who we are and what we do and the services that we provide. So the organization began in 2016 after my daughter Millie died by suicide. Her death led me on a path that, you know, anyone who's been impacted by a death, but particularly a death by suicide, a particular path of looking for support and finding things that might resonate with them. And for me, I was particularly drawn towards the idea of connecting with other people who had been bereaved by suicide. I didn't find them. There wasn't an organization around at the time. So as they say, build it and they will come. I set about setting up the organization, which came into being called Hug. So in 2017, we held our very first support group. And what makes suicide bereavement support groups in Hug a bit different is that our support groups are not counselling. They're not a therapeutic, they are therapeutic, but they're not a formal therapeutic intervention. They're a way for people to come together in a space and a time that is dedicated to them to allow them to talk about their grief and their loss in a safe space. And our first event was held in Dublin in 2017. And I suppose, sadly, in one way, we found that it was a service that people desired. So we decided to set about establishing Hug as a charity and looking to develop our strategy on how we could best support people impacted by suicide in Ireland. So essentially, this is what we set out to do. We know that you can't fix grief, you can't fix bereavement, no more so after a suicide or any form of death. But what you can do is you can, through education and through support, is give people hope. And we sort of say hope is the best panacea for pain. If people feel that there is somewhere for them to go, or somehow that they can connect with people who truly understand what they're going through, they feel a sense of control, and through that sense of control and compassion, a space which will allow them to find some hope and eventually, in time, some healing around their pain. We know that takes time. It's a vision, but it's a vision that we set about achieving through a myriad of events. So what are those events? Well, you know, our mission sort of sets them out, and without going into too much detail, we really look at sort of 5 different pillars on how we try to do that. We provide telephone support, and that means that anybody who has been impacted by suicide can contact us, and they will speak to somebody who is a Hug member of staff and somebody who also has a lived experience of suicide. And I think that's really important for people to understand that when they are talking with people in Hug, they're talking to people who have that lived experience. So the connection is there from the very beginning. None of us can walk in somebody else's shoes, but when we have a shared experience, you know, it can often provide us with a degree of comfort in the sense that in the round they understand where, you know, our pain is emanating from, and perhaps give us a sort of a light and a hope for a way forward. We do a lot of research, and we find that research, particularly in this area, is there's not very much of it. So we come together with partners in research, which we hope will then improve policy and services for everybody in the country, because sadly, none of us know when or if we will ever be impacted by a loss by suicide. So trying to ensure the supports are there is really important. So that's a piece of work that we do. We work with professionals all the time, and my colleagues here on this call are sort of an example of that. We work with many different organizations, with bereavement network groups like the Limerick Bereavement Network Group, Mental Health Ireland, and a variety of different charities, all of whom have an interest in providing support to people who have been impacted by loss. And in our instance, it's particularly suicide bereavement that we're interested in. Throughout the year, we hold lots of events, public events throughout the year. We held one very recently in Limerick, which was really, it was oversubscribed, which shows that there is an appetite for people to feel safe and come together and feel that they are in a space where they can talk about their loss or not talk about their loss, but merely be in the company of people where suicide, which unfortunately, as we know, still carries a stigma for many people, just allows a space where we can talk about how it impacts our lives and look at ways of coping and dealing with this bereavement and finding tools to help us do that. So we, like I say, our event in Limerick, which we call Compassionate Conversations. We have lots of compassionate conversations around the country. So we had one 2 weeks ago in Kerry, And our next one, if you fancy a trip up to the tippity top of the country, is going to be up in Bundoran. But do keep an eye on our website. We have events online all the time as well. And finally, we look at advocating for change. And this is with, policymakers and institutions. So we're looking at some work around the coroner's court at the moment, because we know that events like this have a particular impact on top of the loss that people might not even consider when they have, if they have not been bereaved by suicide. So what do we do? Well, they're listed there, all the different things that we do, everything from signposting people to finding ways of support, because we know everybody wants different things and needs different things at different stages in their life after they've been bereaved. They might want to just read an article or a piece of information. They want to find out about different resources for themselves, or maybe for a family member or a friend or a colleague. So our website is kept up to date, and we pride ourselves in really being as inclusive as possible, because we are only just one part of bereavement support. So we try and embrace every element that's out there. Lots of resources there. As I touched on earlier, our support service is talking to lovely staff members who can help guide you and point you in the direction that you might like to go in, whether it's to some other resource or to our support groups or to lots of other different sort of areas. Our support groups, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail, are dotted around the country. We have a support group in Limerick. Our grief education, our events like our compassionate conversations, and then opportunities to listen to what we call the lived voice. That's when we ask people who perhaps are a little further along in their journey of grief, would like to maybe share their experience about what helped them or hindered them, when they had been impacted by a loss, after a suicide. And that, again, it gives people, a chance to connect with somebody else's story, because we all learn from others and we can all gain experience and information. So by providing the lived voice, as we call it, it gives people another opportunity to connect. And it's just a lovely way of helping to destigmatize the conversation around suicide, which can be frightening to some people even to think about. So I spoke about our support groups. This map will just kind of show you, where they are dotted around the country. We have 17 at the moment. 14 of them meet in person and hybrid. And what we mean by hybrid is that if you can't come to a hub group, say its distance is a little bit too far for you, or if you don't have a car, or perhaps, there are other constraints, on your mobility, you can come to any of our support groups virtually. So people will be in the room, but you can join online at the same time. And it's a very immersive experience. So our Limerick group meets in Limerick City every 2 weeks for 2 hours. And this is a place that you are very welcome to join anytime. You can come as often as you like. You can come once, you can come dozens of times. It's completely open. But everybody who comes to our groups, they come and join via our website. And it means that, we find out a little bit more about you, and you find out a little bit more about us, and can ask all of the questions that you may have about what happens in a group and what to expect, so that you're walking in feeling, okay, I'm okay about going to attend this group, because we know it can be very daunting walking into a space that you've never been in before. It can be a little bit overwhelming. So, we want to break that down and make people feel comfortable. We have virtual only groups for people who don't want to walk physically into a room. That's okay as well. We have virtual only groups, and we have these specifically for parents who have lost a child to suicide, regardless of age, for our young adults, and then for any other age group, a general group. So even if there isn't a group near you in Limerick, if Limerick City is not convenient to you, you know that you can join online, either through hybrid or in a group that's in another county or on its own. So some people feel a little shy about maybe joining a local group. They might feel a little inhibited. That's okay. We totally understand. There are lots of options there. hopefully in time that map will be covered in nice pink pins all over the place, but we have 17 at the minute and we are constantly growing. And what's important to say is that every single one of our support groups are led by trained volunteers. And every single one of these trained volunteers has been impacted by suicide. So they are, if you like, holding the torch for people who maybe are at the start of their journey and they're a little bit further on. And they're helping to what we call facilitate the conversation. So it's compassionate listening. We don't give advice, but we share stories, we share experiences, and we share hopes, and share a space where you can say perhaps things that might be unsayable somewhere else, where people feel like they don't have permission to talk freely, maybe through pain or through stigma or lack of opportunity. This is a dedicated space, 2 hours for you and yourself and your own self-care, and a way of you hopefully to start making sense of a loss that is really sometimes very difficult to understand. So that's just a little quote from Owen, one of our facilitators. I'll just let you read that yourself. So Owen came to us originally not long after his dad had died. And Owen not only stayed in our group, but he went on to train as a facilitator and facilitate a group himself, which, you know, obviously a lot of our members do, which is wonderful. And that's what we call from grief to growth, you know. What we really hope for everybody is that they find some healing and that they can go forward and grow around their grief. I wanted to play a very short little video for you. And this is from one of our group members, Trish. And hopefully you'll be able to all hear it. So let me just try it out.
Hi, my name's Trish, and I lost my lovely brother Shane in 2018. He died by suicide. Losing my brother was the most traumatic experience I've ever had. And following his passing, I didn't know where to turn, because until then I'd never been touched by suicide, and no one I knew had been touched by suicide. I tried one-on-one counselling, but it just wasn't for me. And then I discovered Hug, filled in the form, and attended my first meeting. From that first meeting, I felt hope, and it gave me the space to heal, surrounded by those who've been through it before. Questions were answered. I didn't even have to ask the questions. They were answered by members telling their stories, their experience, what they were going through. So from that day, I felt I started to heal, and you know, that it was okay. I knew I'd never feel normal again without my brother and the trauma of what had happened. But my life is normal now, a new normal, but normal.
So I hope that little video from Trish just gives you a sense of what happens in a hub group, you know, that it is a space for people to feel what they need to feel and maybe to tell their story over and over again, which helps us to make sense, you know, of loss and make sense of something, you know, traumatic like a suicide, you know, really start to come to terms with what it means in life after somebody has died. Because we say when someone dies by suicide, it's not how they died, but how they lived. So for us, it's most important not just to deal with the trauma of what's happened, but really to give space to remember the person that has died and to keep them part of our lives. So when we think about suicide bereavement in particular, these are three themes that, you know, come up time and again. And these come from the National Suicide Bereavement Survey that we did with our colleagues in UCC, who are called the National Suicide Research Foundation. And this was really, so we wanted to find out, how does grief impact on people's lives? And these were the top 3 areas that people told us about. You won't be surprised to hear that people feeling guilt for, you know, how the person has died and were they responsible and all those things. Of course, we know that they're not. Nobody is responsible whatsoever. There is no need to feel guilty. It's a feeling that a lot of people are left with, which is why we need support on looking at that and finding out how to rid ourselves of that feeling. Looking for the why. Why did the person die? Looking for a reason. And sadly, there isn't a reason. Suicide is very complicated. There isn't one reason why somebody would die by suicide. But that search for an answer is something that a lot of people who've been impacted by suicide feel. And it's that search that consumes a lot of their time. And we touched briefly on stigma. And stigma we think about as feeling, you know, perhaps people are talking about us or talking negatively about us or about the person who died. But it could also be a self-stigma, feeling that nobody wants to hear about our own pain or our own bereavement because the person died by suicide. So that's a self-stigma as well. So these are sort of areas that we talk about and look at in the support groups as well, to help people make sense of these areas and to listen to other people's experiences around them. So when we have these three sort of themes that come up when people have been impacted, they themselves then can generate into other ways of what we call maladaptive grieving. And when it's not a very positive way of grieving, people may have mental health challenges that come about because of these overriding and overwhelming sense of guilt and stigma or shame. There may be family problems that come up, you know, people blaming each other, people feeling that somebody didn't care enough or love somebody enough. So a lot of things that maybe need to be worked through. And then people look at other ways of coping, ways that aren't very healthy, perhaps like using alcohol or drugs as a way of trying to cope with the pain and loss. So we're not saying that hug is the place to look after all of these issues, but it's a way to start looking at some of them. And again, we signpost to professionals who would deal with this on a therapeutic level where we don't have all of the answers, but they're safe places to start talking about them. So I wanted to end on hope, which I think is a really important word to end on. You know, I think it's important to think of hope when we think of loss, regardless of what type of loss we might be experiencing in life. This is a lovely little image. It's from a counsellor in New Zealand called Jane Tompkins, and she did this little illustration to one of her clients, and it's one that we use because we think it really helps people to think about grief and loss and where hope can happen. So when we think about our losses and we think about our grief, we look at the heart, and the heart being, you know, the love we have for the person and the pain that we have, and the jar being our life. And if you look at the first jar, you know, you can kind of see it consumes our every thought and being. It completely fills up everything. So our maybe every thought is around loss and grief, and it touches off every part of us, making us feel pain and suffering. And, you know, there's no room for anything else, no room for enjoyment, no room for anything good. It's all negative. And people think that, well, actually, as time goes on, that the loss and the grief you feel for a person will get smaller, you know, so then there's room for lots of other things in your life. But actually, that's not what happens in life. What happens in life is that our grief stays the exact same. You know, how could it get smaller? The love you had for the person who died doesn't get any smaller. So how could the loss or the grief for that person get any smaller? It stays exactly the same. But what does happen is that as time goes on and as we get more coping mechanisms and tools to deal with grief and loss, our life gets bigger. We allow things back into our life that perhaps are, you know, we can't see at the very beginning, you know, that the pain will subside, that there is room again for laughter and for family and friends and experiences. And all of that can exist without taking away or detracting from the grief and the love and the loss that we have for the person that's died. So it's just a nice little visual way of saying that your loss may get small, may not diminish, but your life will increase. So that's me. that's the way to contact us. I would say contact Hug anytime. We're available on all the social media networks and through, you know, obviously all the usual channels. And I know that Claire will be sharing some of these resources later on. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Fiona, thank you so much. It's great to get that information about Hug and such important work. And you can see that how fast you're growing, how badly needed it is as well. And that people really need that space to be able to get the support. And peer support is just something that I'm so passionate about as well, because literally no one can understand what another person is going through in a real sense unless they've been through it themselves. So great to hear that the people who attend are putting themselves forward in those ways as well. They're very brave, and that's amazing to hear. Thank you so much for that. Tricia, we'd love to hear some more about your work as well in around hospice. So please do tell us all about it, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Claire, for inviting me, and for Fiona and Jennifer. So I suppose I started off initially as an artist. My background was art, and I felt a pull to work in end of life. So I came in initially as a volunteer artist, and I was training in psychotherapy at the time. And that's a long time ago now. And I'm here doing it for probably, I think this is my 17th or my 18th year working in palliative care. So I think that the area of grief with palliative patients is particularly under-resourced, not recognised a lot of the time. And as soon as you start Googling, what you'll notice is it's all about anticipatory grief. So that's like the anticipation of what's going to happen and what's going to unfold, and the dying process and death and the loss of that. But it's much more complex and layered than that. And this is where I feel I should have probably had a presentation with some bullet points the next time. The next time around, I'll be much more organised. So when people come to me, by the time I see them in palliative care, they're usually referred to me by the palliative consultants, by the home care team, so the home care nurses, or the nurses in palliative daycare. So I work in palliative daycare, and then I also work in what we call the inpatient unit, which is our hospice here in Kerry, which opened probably 7 or 8 years ago now. And there's 15 beds in it, and that's going to be extended shortly. So I see the patients when they come in here. They can be newly diagnosed as a palliative patient. They could be palliatively ill for a long period of time. Certainly some of the neurological illnesses, people can have motor neuron disease for 5 years. We can have ALS, other neurological illnesses, heart disease, kidney disease for years and years, whereas most of the cancers will be more short term. I work with people from 16 years of age and upwards, all the way up into their 80s. I think the eldest patient I had was 87, and everything in between. So by the time a person comes into palliative care, they have already experienced huge loss, massive grief. And I think of a lot of the time, you know, the root of the word grief is gravare. That's the Latin root of it, and it means to make weighty or to be weighty. And it is sometimes, I notice, there's almost like the physicality of the person coming in the door. You can see it etched on them and their physical body. They're stooped with the weight of it. A lot of the time, people, when I meet them, they've lost everything that they knew about themselves, everything that they defined in their lives as important. So I suppose in modern day times, there's huge importance on how we look, how we present, what job do we do, how important we are we successful, do we have a nice car, do we have a nice house, do we go on holidays? So they're all the really external things, but they are what makes life important for most people. And by the time I meet people here in palliative care, most of that has just been swept away completely. So work is gone. And work might have gone a long time before that, or quite a short time, because I can meet sometimes people that are palliatively ill. For instance, somebody lately, I didn't meet her until the end of January, and she died a week and a half ago. So in that space of time, we worked very intensely 3 times a week. So it's that. So it's she was palliatively ill very quickly. She found out she was ill and was also told she was palliatively ill very quickly after that initial diagnosis. So very, very fast. Life changes really, really fast for a person. So work is gone, independence is gone. And so the losses, sometimes they're termed as little losses, whereas I don't see them as little, because they are all the things that we see as important and what defines us in modern day terms. So the physicality, by the time I see a person, they don't look anything remotely like what they looked like before they got ill. And I haven't met them before. So sometimes I talk about, tell me about what life was like before, and what happened and what you looked like. And sometimes people bring in photographs and they'd say, this is what I used to be like. And it can be very far removed from who was sitting in front of me. So that's tremendous loss and grief that they're engaging with and that they're feeling in relation to their life and their freedom. And it's like, I suppose, with palliative illness, it's by the time a person is palliatively ill and as the weeks go on in palliative care, it's like if you were to think that your life is like a quilt, the way the American quilt is, every person's life is told on the quilt. Well, it's like the scissors is just cutting swathes of it away until they're left on a tiny little patch. And that's when I meet them in here. They're on that tiny little patch of fabric and sometimes feeling very, very lost and almost always feeling incredibly isolated. It's the one theme that's present across the board. So people can have amazing friends and family that are there for them, support them through everything, but they're completely alone in what they're going through because there's a lack of communication about dying, but there's also a lack of communication about where they're at. So, we in Ireland, like we're great talkers, including myself. I would have to say I can talk and talk, but we're very, very good at saying, come on now and keep going. And, you've got to fight this. And we're into that. But that's the narrative around serious illnesses. Kind of, you got to fight this. You got to keep doing battle. You can't let this win. It's all that sort of talk. But when you're palliatively ill, you've gone beyond that. You've gone beyond that talk. And so people a lot of the time don't know what to say to you. They've no idea. And so they can avoid you completely. And people would talk about that, about friends that they thought were really close, but that they're really strange with them or really off with them. And it's not that they don't love them or want to support them, but I think people really don't know what to say to someone who is palliatively ill. When they can't be saying, come on now, keep going, and this is all going to be better, and go for gold, and that doesn't really in palliative care at all. So there can be that tremendous isolation where the family as well are all about telling them, you look great today, and you've been for your walk today, or in any way, the usual encouragement that you get from people who love you, that want the best for you, but that's not their reality inside. And there's a lot of pretending that goes on in when someone is palliatively ill in the family. There's a lot of unspoken stuff happens, and what can happen even with the closest of couples. The person that's ill doesn't want to upset the loved ones. The loved ones don't want to upset the person who's ill, so they just don't go there.
So there's no communication at all then, Tricia.
It drops. The communication is very superficial then. It's very on the surface. It's about the day-to-day stuff, and it's saying what they think are all the right things and encouraging them, but it's the depth doesn't actually happen, the depth of the conversation. And both of them are yearning for that, but they just don't know how. So that's the area I am incredibly passionate about, is the communication about dying and death.
I'm interested to bring I'm interested to bring Jennifer in here, because the research and stuff that you do, Jennifer, just would is that news to you? And I'm sure it's not news to you in terms of the communication around death and dying, particularly.
I could sit and listen to Tricia talk all day about her work, and I think there's some lovely kind commonalities between Trisha's work and also what Fiona has done with Hug is like creating these spaces for people to talk at length and without worrying that, you know, we have to rush and finish this up, or this is going to be unsafe, or gosh, the kids are going to hear this, or I don't want my mom to hear me, you know, speaking this way, just where we can talk and be real. And I think Irish people are so good, so good and kind to people in like the immediate time around death. You know, there are people who will drive from one end of the country to the other to get to a removal, to make sure that they're there, to make sure, you know, to bring the plate of sandwiches, to make sure to send the mass card. They're so good. But it's the bits maybe beforehand when we could have the real conversations about what do you mean to me? Can I just check in? What do I mean to you? What's going to happen after I go? Where do you think I'm going? Where do I think I'm going? You know, what is it that I want to have happen with me after I do go? And, you know, how do I envision your life kind of going on? All of those things, we could come up with a million questions that maybe we just have to give ourselves the pause to do. Yeah, the pause to do. And I hope, you know, my fingers are crossed that Death Cafe Limerick provides that little space sometimes for people to have those entrees into conversations in a safe way. And it sounds to me, well, I know for sure that the fantastic work that Hug does gives people in a very particular experience of grieving after a suicide, the chance to do as well as Trisha's kind of one-to-one work within a palliative care setting.
Yeah, there's so much I want to say stigma around death as well, you know what I mean? And particularly, you know, as you said, Fiona, you know, around suicide, there's a particular stigma, but also just around death in general. You know, people are afraid to talk about it, to bring it up in conversations. And for the person who is directly affected by it, from what you're saying, it sounds very lonely, regardless of, you know, what the cause is.
I think we're very good at death in Ireland. I think we are, as you said, Jennifer, superb at death, but not at dying. Not at the dying part. We're missing so much. And I would say that has to change, because think of the percentage of us that will be dying from cancer, because it is the fastest growing disease, and it's cancer and heart disease, both quite slow diseases. That's the majority of us are going to die from those illnesses. And so I certainly want to be around someone that can hold a conversation with me and can be real with me. And I would want my family to be able to be real with me. But we're not going to get to that place unless we learn how, and unless we're open to engaging in it. And we have to be taught that, I feel. Yeah. That
literacy that you were talking about, Jennifer, as well. So going along like to death cafes, or going along to the bereavement events and stuff like that, and getting those words and even seeing how other people speak about it, you know, and helping ourselves to be more comfortable with having those discussions before the fact, if you like, or, you know, or after the fact as well, being able to speak about it, about the death of the person, about the person and everything else. I mean, palliative care is so amazing. My uncle, they're just, you know, they really facilitate conversations as well. And there's so many amazing organizations, which so many I didn't know about, but I'm learning about today, and hopefully our audience will learn about as well. There's one question, and I know we're almost done with time. Can you imagine? I think we're definitely going to have to look at this subject again. Absolutely. I definitely want to get into it more depth anyway, but definitely one question I was very interested in. It's probably two, but if I can ask this one, do men and women grieve differently, do you think?
Well, maybe I could sort of give a short answer on that. I think that in the round, no, they don't formally grieve differently. I think we assume that they do, because women may be seen as overtly more emotional grievers, maybe seen to cry more. So that means that they are feeling the grief more. We know that there is no difference in how men and women feel grief and feel loss. I think perhaps women might be more emotional grievers in how they visibly show their grief, and men might be more what we call instrumental grievers, and how they sort of might show their grief through actions. You'll notice, going back to what Jennifer had said earlier, you know, if you want something done, usually the men will be the first ones to jump up and say, I'll do that. I'll go down to the shops and get that. I'll go and I'll drive the car, I'll pick up what needs to be picked up, you know, what's required, you know, after a funeral or when somebody's grieving. But if you ask them maybe to do some of the more emotionally heavy work, there might be a little bit of a reticence. But I think it's a little unfair to say that men aren't emotional grievers too. I think that a lot of the time we're blended, you know, we're a little bit of both. We're not predominantly one or the other. We might have been leaning towards it. I think after somebody has died, I think it's an area that a lot of people struggle with. You might hear, you know, a woman might say, oh, my husband doesn't seem to care. He's able to get up and go to work, you know, and how can he do that when we've gone through this terrible loss? We know that's not the case at all. It's conditioning, and it's, you know, there are social factors, there are practical issues that come into it. So I think that,
Yeah.
you know, it's easy to say that they grieve differently. I think that there are different aspects to it, and we just have to be mindful that, you know, when you understand that, oh, well, hang on a second, when I've gone through a bereavement, what was I more comfortable with? Was I more comfortable getting up and doing an action? Or was I more comfortable sitting down beside the person who was bereaved and listening to them, you know, or, you know, just be able to sit with my own grief? That might give you sort of an inkling towards what kind of griever you are, and maybe be a little bit more tolerant of how different people grieve, you know, to kind of see, well, there's space for every different type of griever.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I've heard more than once that people talked about how the first time they saw their father cry was at a funeral of a loved one, you know, but there was no comment made about their mother, because there would have been an assumption maybe that their mother would have cried at some point in their lives. I can't believe, but we're actually nearly at the end. It's been so interesting. I could just talk for another hour, but we don't have another hour. But I do want to say to each of you, thank you so much for being here today. And I do believe that people have learned valuable information, and the information we're going to share out afterwards as well. I hope we, through this in a very, very small way, we've contributed to that literacy, Jennifer, and definitely given people the options anyway to go and expand their literacy around death and dying and everything that it entails. So I just want to thank you all, Jennifer, Fiona, Tricia. Thank you so much for coming out today. I really do appreciate you giving your time and sharing your expertise and knowledge with us. We're almost there with 3 minutes to go. So I'm just going to share that we are, as I say, going to be sending out resources. There are a couple of different events happening very soon in Limerick. Now, and like this webinar will go out in a lot of different places. But you know, there are a couple of different events happening that I do want to just share with you. So let me just share my screen here now. So there's going to be a free talk on bereavement on the 28th of May by Milford Hospice in the Milford Care Centre Education Department of Castletroy, Limerick. And it also says this poster again will be sent out who this is absolutely intended for. Anna and Cara then are also holding a bereavement information evening on the 2nd of May in Milford Care Centre as well. And as Jennifer said, you can follow what she's doing about the death cafes. You can follow Fiona's organisation Hug and what they do. And you know, the Irish Hospice Foundation have information about hospice care throughout the country. So if it's, you know, if we're not talking about it here today, they'll have information about hospice care in the region closest to you. So thank you to everybody for coming along today. It was just so interesting. Thank you again. Listen, take care of everybody. And if we all just turn off our videos, we can come back again in a few minutes. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
You're welcome. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you.